Former slave and abolitionist Frederick Douglass described Louisiana's sugar country as a life of living death. Since the early 1700s, Louisiana has produced sugarcane. This production survived by the enslaved African strenuous labor. Once freed after the American Civil War, these Louisianan sugarcane workers still experienced slave-like conditions. In 1887, the Knights of Labor organized sugar strikes where black workers struck for better pay. The sugar strikes resulted in the Thibodaux Massacre, a conflict resulting in 35 deaths. The massacre contributed to the low-wage economy and limited union growth in the South today. The establishment of slavery in the South led to the barbarities shown at the Thibodaux Massacre conflict. Slavery had been used since the arrival of white Europeans in Louisiana. In 1701, French explorer Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne established residence on Louisiana's Gulf Coast in present-day Mobile, Alabama. French and German immigrants settled, and eventually this area of Louisiana became best known as the German coast or Côte d'Albans, where cash crops thrived in farmable lands and were connected to global trade. Moyne brought sugarcane with him to Louisiana. Being an experimental crop, strenuous, cheap labor was required. The Chickamauga tribe of Louisiana that lived along the shores of the Mississippi River were enslaved by planters. However, the Chickamauga fought for 12 years from 1706 to 1718 to resist enslavement on sugar plantations. When France refused Moyne's request for slaves from West Africa, he traded his Chickamauga Indian slaves for black slaves from the Caribbean. Slavery became an important economic source of labor. In 1805, Henry Schuyler Thibodaux, a planter, founded the town of Thibodaux in the Lafourche Parish. By 1859, the number of slaves in Terrebonne, Lafourche, and other parishes increased to 21,276. Yearly, 350,000 hogsheads, or bales of sugar, were produced. Working on sugar plantations was labor-intensive. Slaves were hunched over, digging at the ground to plant seeds by hand, tending to each row. As the stalks grew, slaves would use hefty cane knives to remove weeds. Children and adults were essentially nurturers to the fields. Sugarcane was also processed into molasses or white sugar. The molasses could be turned into rum or brown sugar. Poor conditions caused tragic deaths from workers stumbling while operating the boiler, being scorched from juices, and losing arms in the cane crushers. Jean Moore, former Louisiana sugar plantation slave, shared, "If they don't do dey work, dey buck dem down and whip dem. Dey tie de hands and feet together and make 'em put de hands tween de knees, and put a long stick tween de hands so dey can't pull 'em out, and then they whip dem in good fashion." For the Civil War, Louisiana was the United States' sole sugar-producing state. The American Civil War lasted from 1861 to 1865. The 11 states seceding from the Union formed the Confederate States of America. This temporary government's goal was to secure the economic benefits of slavery and call for a peaceful departure from the Union. The Northern victory in the Civil War determined that slavery would no longer continue in the United States. The Civil War caused significant challenges and serious economic losses to sugarcane productions in Louisiana. After the war, the Radical Reconstruction era from 1865 to 1877 furthered the tensions between blacks and whites in the South, leading to the conflict of the Thibodaux Massacre. Black and white Southerners struggled to build a new society, but ultimately whites prevailed, and a revised, still unequal social structure was created where black Americans were taken advantage of. For example, Southern planters' long-standing views of the societies in the same context as cattle did not easily change during Reconstruction. Covert societies formed like the Knights of White Camellia, White League, and the Ku Klux Klan used threatening actions and death to oppose the rights of Louisiana freedmen. Almost 3,500 people were killed or wounded between 1866 and 1875. From 1882 to 1936, at least 389 lynchings, or illegal punishments, occurred in Louisiana. About 333 victims were African American. By 1877, Reconstruction ended, and the Compromise of 1877, which put President Hayes in office, also removed federal troops from the South, was put into action. The civil rights freed blacks had attained were not fulfilled because of white rule in the Southern states. Although slavery was over, the slave-like conditions continued on sugar plantations in Louisiana for up to 10,000 workers. These workers were paid 65 cents per day. Every month, each worker received an average of $13 in passport tickets, which were only used at the plantation store for food and necessities that had been marked up 100%. The Thibodaux sugar strikes and resulting Thibodaux Massacre conflict were organized by the Knights of Labor, or KOL. The KOL, beginning in 1896, were originally a secret society of tailors in Philadelphia devoted to the laboring classes. Under Terence Patterly's leadership, establishing an 8-hour workday and an improvement in working conditions were essential priorities to the KOL while renouncing violence. The New Orleans Times-Picayune states on March 19, 1880, "The trouble seems to have arisen from a labor strike, which grew until it eliminated one in a murderous assault. It appears that a number of Negroes struck for low-size of wages. They organized themselves into bands, and went to every plantation in the neighborhood, endeavoring to make the strike a general one. When a laborer refused to join them and quit work in the fields, he was immediately attacked with sticks and canes and badly beaten." Once again in 1885, black Louisiana sugar plantation workers struck for better pay, with help from the Knights of Labor, pledging their allegiance. The KLO formed the Local Assembly 8404 in Shreveport for the Organization of Planters in Thibodaux, Louisiana. The KLO demanded that the Louisiana Sugar Planters Association, or LSPA, pay laborers $1.25 each day, change pay from passport tickets to cash, and pay extra for night work. These demands seemed highly unreasonable to the LSPA due to the racial discrimination white planters felt toward black workers. After the KLO's request was rebuffed, 10,000 plantation workers in Louisiana walked off their job in strike, claiming they would not return until their needs were met. The timing could not have been worse for plantation owners who were just beginning the rolling season. These sugar strikes led to the Thibodaux Massacre on November 23rd of 1887. The Louisiana State Militia was brought in to maintain order, but according to the Knights of Labor, was being used by the planters who controlled the strikers, as the militia was used to move strikers out of their homes on the plantations. After 2 weeks, the militia's role declined and white landowners took over the fight against strikers. These vigilantes' minds were consumed by vengeance, fear, or combinations of both. Clayton Block's LaForce militia and white citizens started firing on men and women who participated in the strikes, as he was angry at the sight of black and white workers on strike together. He said, "God Almighty has himself drawn the color line." The Southwestern Christian Advocate expressed how Negroes fled to the swamp like frightened sheep, as white vigilantes shot at them. According to survivor Jack Conrad, "I think there were about 50 or 60 men in the crowd, which was comprised entirely of white citizens who lived in and around Thibodaux." Conrad said, "When I opened the door, one of the mob said, 'Crack down on him,' and at that they went to shooting. Jack, his son Grant, and brother-in-law Marcelin were told to line up, and they began to run. Grant was gunned down behind a water barrel. Marcelin Weldon was shot as he ran in another direction, and Jack himself took cover under his house as the gunmen continued shooting, leaving to go to another house after they presumed him dead. There were wails of women, shouts of men, and the unceasing cries of babies, as more shots were fired. At the conclusion of the Thibodaux Massacre, up to 60 people were dead, and the bodies were disposed of in an unmarked grave." Ellen Baker Bell suggests that what began as a disagreement over wages became an expression of racial tensions that had been building up since the dissolution of slavery. Shortly after the massacre, the surviving laborers who struck or were afraid to work during the strikes went back to work. The conditions did not change or improve. No immediate compromise was made. The Knights of Labor dissolved and was replaced by a stronger, more influential organization, the American Federation of Labor. Opinions were expressed in newspapers about this outrageous behavior displayed from both the strikers and vigilantes. The locals of the New Orleans Knights of Labor suggested an investigation of the entire affair, but no investigation happened. Reverend Charles Menard, Thibodaux's Catholic priest, describes the KLO organizers as bad advisors due to the eruption of violence occurring from the strikes. Although the Thibodaux Massacre did make it into the U.S. Congressional record, acknowledging that it did occur, no further actions were taken by the government to solve this inhumanity. The slave-like conditions for workers on sugar plantations prevailed. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 was put into action. This labor law created minimum wage, the 40-hour work week with overtime pay, and the prohibition of the employment of minors for the most part. However, before the enactment of the law, the South argued to the Department of Labor that a 25-cent minimum wage would mean firing all their workers. John McClellan, an Arkansas representative, rhetorically asked, "What profiteth the labor of the South if he gain the enactment of a wage and hour law, 40 cents per hour and 40 hours per week, if he then loses the opportunity to work?" Due to mechanization in the industrial era, less labor was needed. Once the Thibodaux Massacre ended, the industrial era was beginning and fewer laborers were needed in Louisiana sugar fields and processing plants. Today, sugar is planted and harvested with tractors. 2 huge mechanized processing plants process all of the sugar for the state of Louisiana. Since the Thibodaux Massacre conflict, no significant compromise was created that made black labor conditions equal to white workers in the South, particularly Louisiana. According to Harold Meyerson, the South's aversion to both minimum wage standards and unions is rooted deep within the DNA of white Southern elites whose primary impulse has always been to keep African Americans down. A 2015 estimate put the per capita income rate in Louisiana at $35,000 annually for whites and $15,000 annually for blacks. The Thibodaux Massacre conflict contributed to the limited growth of unions in the South. The Center for Economic and Policy Research states that in Louisiana in 1983, the percentage of workers in unions was 18.1%. By 2008, had decreased to 5.6%. According to Harold Meyerson, due to the South's low-wage economy and cheap labor, in 2012, General Electric reshored its production of refrigerators and water heaters from Mexico and China to its appliance park factories in Kentucky. Although Appliance Park was unionized, in recent years a 2-tier contract was established where the 17% of low-tier workers made much less than the senior workers. The lower-tier workers starting hourly pay is just over $13.50, almost $8 less than what new workers at Appliance Park used to receive. In conclusion, the Thibodaux Massacre is an unresolved and enduring conflict with no significant compromise made to create equal labor conditions between black and white workers, contributing to a low-wage economy and the limited growth of unions in the South.